It was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. Under the warm glow of the late spring sun, the little countryside chapel sat nestled among blooming wildflowers and tall oaks beside Lake Morgan. Inside, everything felt magical. Daniel and Rachel Whitmore stood before family and friends. He in a crisp black tuxedo, she in a flowing ivory gown whose train shimmered with delicate lace that caught the light with every movement. The air smelled of roses, a fragrance that had been carefully chosen by Rachel's mother to fill the sanctuary with a timeless elegance. Orchids and peonies spilled over the altar, while the sun, gradually setting, filtered through stained glass windows in hues of amber and rose. It all felt like a scene out of a fairy tale. Music filled the warm night, wrapping around the guests like a soft embrace. A quartet of string musicians played Clair de Lune as the couple exchanged vows. Onlookers dabbled in tears, touched by the sincerity in Daniel's voice as he promised to love and cherish Rachel for all the days of his life. The congregation laughed softly when he joked that he'd share the last slice of pizza with her, even on nights when she forgot to take out the trash. It felt real, as if their love could withstand anything life threw at them. Afterwards, guests spilled out onto the lawn, where lanterns hung from the trees and long wooden tables overflowed with desserts. There were speeches. Rachel's younger sister read a poem she had written, and Daniel's best friend reminisced about their college road trips, ending with a toast to the new couple. Glasses of champagne tinkled in the mellow night air. Someone played at last, as the couple shared their first dance under the stars. It felt like nothing could ruin the moment. And then came the part everyone anticipated. The moment when Daniel and Rachel would disappear into the night, hand in hand, and start their honeymoon. At a little after 10 p.m., they climbed into Daniel's beloved 1969 Pontiac GTO, its cherry red paint gleaming even in the moonlight. The engine rumbled as he started the car, and they waved at their loved ones one final time. A friend snapped their photo as headlights lit up the gravel driveway, capturing their laughter and excitement in a frame that would later become hauntingly poignant. They were heading to a nearby cabin by the shore, a modest rental with a fireplace and a wraparound porch overlooking the water. It was the sort of place where mornings began with coffee on the deck and evenings ended with soft conversation by firelight. They had planned it for months. This was their escape, their honeymoon sanctuary. But they never arrived. The road was a quiet, narrow country lane, winding through groves of pine and oak. There were no streetlights, just the silver of the moon bouncing on the hood and the distant chorus of night insects. The drive should have taken 15 minutes, but as the minutes passed, worried relatives watched the darkness instead of the road. No car, no texts, just silence. When they didn't check in that night, or the next morning, concern turned into alarm. Texts went unanswered. Voicemails left. Finally, at midday the day after their wedding, one of Rachel's sisters made the dreaded call to the rental company. No reservation, no confirmation that they'd ever arrived. Panic began to spread. Friends and family mobilized and called the police. The local sheriff convened a search party. Helicopters circled the forest. Dive teams probed the shallow edges of Lake Morgan. K-9 units combed the woods. But nothing was found. No tire tracks. No overturned car. No footprints in the gravel. No sign of a struggle. Not even a broken taillight, a lost shoe, anything that would explain their disappearance. Rumors swirled. Had they driven off the road? Had they been victims of a kidnapping? A hit and run? A random act of violence? Or had they disappeared of their own accord, starting a new life far away? Every theory was floated, debated, mourned, discarded. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the story of Daniel and Rachel became a quiet ache in the hearts of those who loved them. The Whitmore families held candlelight vigils in the yard where their wedding began. They printed missing person posters with photos of the couple waving goodbye for the first time and posting them across the county. They contacted national missing persons organizations, took polygraphs, followed every lead. But every investigation wound down with nothing. The county archiving system labeled the case unresolved. For 10 years, nothing changed. Then 20. No new evidence. No bodies recovered. Just an absence that grew heavier with each passing anniversary. And yet the town never forgot. Even as new folks moved in, even as the forest reclaimed parts of the road where they vanished, the story remained active in the whispers of locals. They spoke of the wedding photograph hung in town hall, a color snapshot of the couple laughing as they backed away in the GTO's headlights. They shared her mother's pain. Rachel's mom still kept her daughter's gown carefully boxed, the lace untouched. Daniel's dad made an annual pilgrimage to their wedding spot, leaving pebbles and notes. The cabin by Lake Morgan became part of the legend too. It was remodeled twice, but never rented again on wedding nights. And the curve in the road, where some say the ground seemed to swallow rubber, was named Whitmore Bend by locals. Some claimed they saw the car's taillights flickering in foggy nights. They heard music drifting from the forest. But those who knew whispered that such sightings could be grief and memory. They had no proof. 23 years later, a sudden drought stripped 15 feet of water from Lake Morgan. Shorelines receded. Riverbeds cracked. Dozens of previously submerged trees poked through the drying sand. And in the thinning water near the bend, a group of recreational divers found a rusted metal glint. Under a cloud of mud and water, two skeletal bodies sat motionless inside a car that looked oddly familiar. A bridal veil, preserved in odd clarity, draped over one seat. Beneath the armrest was Rachel's wedding photo, the one captured as they drove away from their dreams. The license plate on the bumper read D&R98. For 23 years, the world had thought they disappeared. For 23 years, grief and mystery filled the air. And now, with a crane's groan and a gasping crowd, Daniel and Rachel were found at last. Their honeymoon journey had ended not in love's embrace, but under 15 feet of lake water. And finally, their story could begin to be told again. Not with questions, but with answers. When Daniel and Rachel failed to check into the cabin and didn't call anyone, unease began to ripple through their family and friends. Initially, most brushed it off as a harmless mix-up or a moment of spontaneity. Perhaps the couple had decided, in the glow of wedding bliss, to drive further into the woods, seeking solitude far from prying eyes. Maybe they chose another cabin or a hidden roadside motel for an impromptu second honeymoon night. Some guessed they might have eloped again for privacy, a notion they joked about in the days leading up to the wedding. Those thoughts comforted anxious loved ones overnight. But when morning came and the sun rose without a single message, that comfort evaporated. Rachel's younger sister, Emily, was the first to call the cabin rental agency, only to be met with pallid confusion. No reservation existed under their names, or any name at all, for that night. Panic set in. That morning, the Whitmore families united for the first time in a long time, not in celebration, but in crisis. First texts, then phone calls went out. Where are they? Did they drive off? Has anyone heard from them? By 10 a.m., friends who had attended the wedding were scrambling through voicemails, answering machines and emails. But no messages, no missed connections. Daniel's phone still rang unanswered. Rachel's went straight to voicemail. Concern spread rapidly. The Whitmores wasted no time. They had pressed the missing persons button on the sheriff's website by midday. An official report was filed, officers dispatched, and frantic chatter filled the station. Deputies led their search operations meticulously. The central clue was the last known route the couple had taken, an isolated country road nursing the lake's shoreline. With cell tower pinging technology, law enforcement pinpointed the GTO's last signal somewhere along that stretch. For now, their only anchor. Search teams fanned out on foot, snaking through dense woods and tall grasses lining the road. Savvy members of the neighborhood watch joined in with high beams and flashlights, hoping to spot those cherry-red taillights swallowed by darkness. Helicopters joined the effort shortly after sunset, their rotors cut low and steady through the calm evening air. Spotlights converged on patches of woods or water where searchers thought the car could have gone off the road or into the lake. From above, Lake Morgan's surface glimmered, a deceptive veil across muddy depths, hiding what could have been a sunken disaster or worse. On the shoreline, dive teams waded in, probing the edge. Their ropes unraveled in precise arcs, but their efforts remained fruitless. No flashes of metal, no debris coils, no tannic-ringed car roof. The divers pushed into deeper water, but found only thick mud and silty rock. No sign of their quarry. Days passed with nightfall turning every searcher inward, bracing for bad news. Local news stations broadcast the story. Friends returned to the stretch of shoreline with renewed hope, leaving flowers or notes on a wooden railing at the road's edge. Volunteers arrived from neighboring counties with drones and infrared devices, joining shore crews. The GTO's license plate became a repeated headline, D&R98, a glaring beacon of hope and heartbreak. Businesses offered free coffee, stations provided maps, the whole town rallied. Yet the water remained silent, the woods unyielding. Each search phase had its own brand of heartbreak. SUVs circulated GPS grids in the fields beyond the road. Cadaver dogs, noses to the ground, ran short loops through shrubs. But the dogs returned empty-pawed. Even rainstorms and weather shifts couldn't dim determination. Families spread flyers, smiling wedding photos imposed against a backdrop of love and tragedy, and on the back, a heartfelt plea: bring them home. Weeks later, officials declared it a missing persons case and opened a cold case file. The Whitmores refused to let go. They sponsored missing posters at every gas station, every store. For months, they lived under the weight of the unsaid. It couldn't end this way. They organized anniversary vigils every month at sunset along that lakeside road. Hundreds showed up with candles, soft music, and shared memories. Investigators examined every lead. They tracked fuel purchases, toll receipts, sightings at restaurants along the route. Surveillance cameras, rare in rural zones, provided nothing. Phone records revealed that both phones had last pinged the same tower, on the highway leading to the lake. Nothing beyond that. No accident report. No abandoned car. No truck logs or flashing highway lights. With each failed lead, the possibility of foul play, kidnapping, robbery, or something darker began to seep in. But no ransom call, no demands. Just silent questions. Time chalked the edges between facts and faith. The community held its breath through the years. The missing picture of the couple drove home the collective dread. This wasn't just about two people's future. The whole town felt fractured. New rumors circulated. Did they erase themselves? Did they meet someone who forced them off the road? Did the lake swallow them slowly, invisibly, as its water rose and curves stayed hidden? Even holidays weighed heavy. Every Christmas card at the Whitmore's house ended with a line for Daniel and Rachel. Missing you always. Friends comforted themselves with small moments, cleaning out their wedding gifts, setting plates for two, lighting candles in honor of what once was. But the truth remained elusive, deep in mud and memory. Search efforts eventually paused. Dive teams withdrawn, helicopters grounded, replaced by hope that they had simply taken off somewhere else. Equipment was packed away, roadways reopened, but the emotional debris lingered. Still, the community remembered. Rachel's photograph hung in the lobby of the sheriff's office, a testament to lost love. People shared stories of late-night sparks, headlights flickering across quiet farm fields, or misheard laughter in the wind rustling trees. Each sighting revived the hunt, each vision a fresh ache. And yet, no resolution, no final act. Just the memory of a wedding night, two star-crossed lovers, and a road that never let them back. A community bound by sorrow, determined that the last seen signal of D&R98 would not be the last we'd hear of Daniel and Rachel. Months turned into years. At first, the entire county felt the weight of uncertainty. Every missing person flyer, every media headline, every whispered theory kept the community on edge. Billboards sprang up along highways, displaying the smiling faces of Daniel and Rachel Whitmore, their joyous wedding photo framed by big, bold text. Missing couple, last seen on wedding night. Travelers passing through Glenview County couldn't help but see them and wonder what had happened. It became a symbol, a mystery that refused to fade. 4 months after their disappearance, tip lines were constantly flooded. People called in sightings of a blue GTO similar to Daniel's racing down highways, of a couple matching their description at diners late at night, of the soft glow of headlights near the lake on foggy mornings. Some reports led to credible, albeit fleeting, leads. An anonymous caller suggested they'd boarded a ferry near the coast, heading south. Another said they'd been seen buying plane tickets. Detectives pursued each lead with urgency. Every midnight roadblock, every multi-city search party, every airport interview added hope, but none led to Daniel or Rachel. Local psychics even got involved. They came forward at press conferences, offering clues about secret tunnels under the lake or spiritual visions showing the couple walking hand in hand into a mist. While law enforcement treated these accounts with skepticism, each one kept the story alive in the public eye and offered grieving families a thread of comfort, however tenuous. By the end of the first year, the initial shock had worn away. The billboards remained, though some letters fell off, and volunteers restocked the tape beneath snapshots of a bridal gown and tuxedo. A small team of amateur sleuths posted their own flyers with sketches of how Daniel and Rachel might look 10 years later. At a community gathering held on the lake's shore, family members lit candles every anniversary, watched as the flickering lights floated across the water, and shared personal memories: his laugh, her favorite dress, the song they danced to. But as time marched on, the number of credible leads dwindled. Police shifted resources to new cases. The tip lines slowed to silence. Psychics' predictions went unfulfilled. Over time, the story transitioned from urgent headline to echoing legend, a sad, unanswered enigma that occasionally resurfaced in conversations or local documentaries. Yet, through silent years of waiting, the Whitmore family's grief never faded. Rachel's mother, Alice, preserved her daughter's life in tangible ways. She kept the wedding photo on her living room mantel, unchanged from the day she framed it. It showed Daniel and Rachel in their formal attire, smiling broadly, eyes locked in joyful promise. Around it were their candlelit reception details, RSVP cards, and even a piece of white lace torn from Rachel's dress, lovingly sewn into the corner of a shadow box frame. Every morning, Alice took a breath beside that photo, whispering, "Come home." Every evening, she sighed as she turned off the lamp, the photo's glass reflecting only the empty chair across from her at the dinner table. If the case had gone cold in the public consciousness, it burned brightly in Daniel's younger brother, Michael. Every year on the couple's missing anniversary, without fail, he climbed into his own late-model GTO, the same curve of the road they traveled when they vanished, and drove the 15-minute stretch along Lake Morgan's edge. He paused at a bend where headlight reflections still glance off the water late at night, where some say Daniel and Rachel may have made their final turn. He laid flowers or rocks inscribed with their initials on the guardrail, whispered names into the wind, and drove home. Michael never believed his brother and sister-in-law had left voluntarily. The cars abandoned along that curve, only the muddy woods and old growth, made him certain of it. His belief became a crusade, fueled by the emptiness of unanswered questions. He would post missing person ads in online forums, track down old records, and deploy social media campaigns every anniversary. He carried their story forward, unwilling to let it slip into obscurity. Still, despite their unwavering dedication, no new evidence ever emerged. No startling DNA sample, no hidden documents, no sonar contacts under the lake deeper than what divers had explored. The case remained open, but it grew dusty. Police files piled up. Investigations were shelved as cold files, periodically reopened then reclosed. No definitive proof of an accident, no criminal record to suggest foul play. Just one red GTO, 2 missing people, and a community left to puzzle. In Glenview County, the disappearance of Daniel and Rachel became legend. New residents heard about it during welcome wagon visits, and local high school students retold the story during ghost tours by Lake Morgan. Folklore blossomed. Cases of headlights flickering late at night, whispers of finding ghostly footprints on the lakeshore, or a bride's dress drifting across the surface in moonlight fog. Some saw them as supernatural occurrences, others as symbolic echoes of their unfinished lives. Local newspapers kept the story alive occasionally, for anniversaries, to profile the grieving families, or to highlight the ongoing volunteer searches by Michael and others who refused to give up. But for many, the story was a cautionary tale. How quickly a perfect beginning could vanish into nothing. Yet for the Whitmore family, and especially Alice and Michael, it was never just a story. It was a living ache and a stubborn hope. Alice never remarried. Rachel's dress remained pristine in its box, never altered, never used again. She told friends she would wear it again. When Rachel came home, Michael, now a man in his 40s, styled the same rugged exterior but with hollowed eyes, forever changed by the stillness of the unknown. In the mornings he woke early and walked the quiet road with the spring sun, imagining his brother's voice calling out of the mist. He believed that someday truth, not legend, would catch up. He still carried laminated photos of the couple when he went on charity runs. He still visited funeral homes anonymously, testing last names and family resemblance. He never gave up. Meanwhile, Lake Morgan retained its quiet beauty and its buried secret. Boats drifted on its surface. Fishermen cast their lines. Lakeside homes flourished. Yet beneath it all lay the silence of the missing car and the missing couple, suspended for years like ghosts waiting for the tide to shift. Glenview County, with its rolling hills and woodsy shores, came to reflect both peace and pain. The same waters that carried family picnics, fireworks, and wedding ripples also bore deeper mysteries. Daniel and Rachel Whitmore became part of that lake's history and the human yearning to find what's lost. On anniversaries when the cherry blossoms bloomed, or when leaves fell and mist rolled in, someone always remembered. Someone always asked, what if they are out there somewhere? Someone always kept that space open in their heart. For Alice and Michael, the story never ended. They never stopped hoping, never stopped searching, never stopped reminding the world about the 2 lives that slipped away one perfect night. And though the case faded from headlines and billboards eventually crumbled, one thing remained: Daniel and Rachel's story, alive in memory, love, and unyielding devotion. Because sometimes, even legends aren't enough. And the real heartbreak of Glenview County came from knowing that 2 best people, 2 perfect souls, disappeared 4 days after their wedding. And all that kept them alive in people's minds was the photo on a mantle and a brother's unwavering drive to keep asking, year after year, have you seen them? Fast forward 23 years, and the world had changed in ways unimaginable since that fateful wedding night. But so had Lake Morgan. In the summer of 2021, the region faced one of the worst droughts in its recorded history. Months of sparse rainfall and unrelenting heat had lowered the lake level by over 15 feet. Shores that had never seen dry land emerged in eerie silhouette, exposing rock formations, dead tree trunks, and long-submerged debris that had remained hidden for decades. Locals began whispering that the lake was giving up its secrets. Boaters complained of strange, shifting islands. Hikers stumbled across foundations where cabins had once stood. What had once been water was now dust, and hidden truths were beginning to surface. It was in this dusty season that a small group of recreational divers decided to explore the deeper pockets of Lake Morgan. They were no professionals, just enthusiasts drawn by the unusual clarity of the water and the chance to see parts of the lake bed that had never been accessible before. On a calm morning in late August, the group set off from the old marina in a modest aluminum boat. Their destination: a drop-off shelf about 200 feet from the shore, where the bottom plunged sharply. They descended slowly into the glassy water. Visibility was better than anything they had experienced in years. Underneath the surface, the lake bed looked like a ghost city. Broken benches, mossy pilings, and tangled remnants of old docks lurking in the haze. It was mesmerizing, and a bit foreboding. As they navigated the mud and silt, their lights suddenly reflected off something unnatural, something metallic. One diver pointed it out with a gloved hand. They cleared away debris, fallen branches, rocks, sediment, and there it was, the roof of a car, grayed and rusted, but still unmistakably a vehicle, a relic of a past long forgotten. Their pulse raced. Maybe it was just an old abandoned car, a prank or a disposal. But instinct told them this was something else. They surfaced quietly and radioed the local sheriff's department, keeping the site secure and avoiding disturbance of the scene. The backhoe arrived within hours. A small crowd gathered on the barren lakeshore, drawn by murmurs of what might lie beneath the water. The operation was slow and respectful. Cranes lowered thick straps into the lake, carefully attaching them to the car's frame. The first pull was tentative, but the car broke free of the mud. Water sluiced off the sides, revealing more of its shape as 15 years of sediment fell away. When the car finally broke the surface with a heavy splash, gasps rippled through the assembled crowd. The rusted hood looked like marble carved by time, and on the bumper, still readable through the grime, D&R98. Daniel and Rachel, 1996, their wedding plate. Tears sprung in the eyes of those who knew the story. Some vomited, others simply stared, paralyzed by the weight of what it meant. Within minutes, forensic teams were on the scene. They sealed the perimeter and carefully documented everything. The vehicle was placed on a flatbed trailer and taken to the sheriff's impound lot, where it would be examined further. Each rusted panel was photographed. Every inch was scanned for clues. An anthropologist stood nearby with evidence tags in hand. They prodded gently inside the car. No windows were whole, but the waterlogged doors gave way with eerie familiarity. Inside, they found shapes seated in what had once been front seats, shapes that turned out to be human remains. A photographer captured the license plate, its lifeline preserved after more than 2 decades underwater. The D&R98 plate was unusual, not just because it was customized, but because of its known association with the Whitmore's GTO. There was no other like it registered in the county or the surrounding states. Police officials, the district attorney, and members of the Whitmore family were called to the lakeshore immediately. Everyone watched as forensics documented what history had turned into myth turned into revelation. The car's condition, its rusted orange surfaces, the bridal veil tangled on the passenger side, and the stern outline of the dashboard, helped paint an instant image. This was Daniel and Rachel's fate. Media crews appeared, silence growing around them as cameras clicked and lights set glare against the lake. Journalists whispered that evidence found inside included a wedding photo in a plastic sleeve, nearly intact, wedding rings still on rusted seat projections, and a license plate still screwed to the bumper. It was the final confirmation the families had been waiting for. No more questions, only heartbreak. The sheriff's office released a brief statement that evening. "We have recovered a submerged vehicle confirmed to be the 1969 Pontiac GTO, belonging to missing persons Daniel and Rachel Whitmore. While investigation is ongoing, the vehicle was located in a remote, recently exposed section of Lake Morgan, and it is clear the vehicle had been submerged for decades. Authorities are working closely with forensic departments to retrieve all human remains and evidence." Full-scale excavation efforts began over the next week. Anthropologists entered the car, carefully retrieving skeletal remains wrapped in deteriorated cloth. The female remains retained a fragment of white dress lace. The male remains held onto what looked like a wallet frame in the console, later confirmed to contain Daniel's driver's license and wedding photo he must have kept at the wheel. DNA analysis later authenticated both bodies as Daniel and Rachel. Dr. Miriam Kent, the county medical examiner, read from her report. Although decomposition is extensive, the skeletal integrity and clothing fragments are consistent with an underwater entrapment scenario. No signs of foul play were detected. Seatbelt rests remain fixed. There is no indication of combustion or violent impact. The vehicle appears to have entered the water at significant speed and remained sealed. For the families, the discovery brought both relief and unbearable grief. Rachel's mother, Alice, collapsed by the shoreline when the news was confirmed. Daniel's brother, Michael, stood at a distance in stunned silence, his monthly vigil finally finding purpose. Across Glenview County, ripples of sorrow and closure spread. Reporters quoted locals who had spent years speculating. Some believed kidnappers, others a car crash. But now, they realized the pickup had come from nature itself. A steep dirt cliff along a blind turn, hidden that night by darkness and dense foliage. When water rose over it and covered the entry, sonar scans missed the silhouette and depth. The community decided to hold a memorial service at the lake. A respectful ceremony on dry lakebed, with a small wooden cross and two pedestals bearing Daniel and Rachel's wedding photo. A bagpiper played Amazing Grace, while family and friends watched the rising sun reflect off still water. There were tears and prayers, but also an air of resolution. Forensic teams worked to map the car's location, create 3D diagrams, and update cold case files. Law enforcement declared the matter closed with the conclusion that Daniel likely lost control and drove off the unguarded bend. The lack of guardrails that existed in 1996 was acknowledged as negligence, and the county agreed to install safety markers moving forward. In the months that followed, Lake Morgan slowly returned to normalcy, flooding again with autumn rains and submerging the shallow seabed. But the car was gone, removed forever. Two sets of remains returned home for funeral services, which merged as one loving ceremony held in the chapel where they were married. Their urns were buried under a pair of apple trees near the chapel, trees planted by their mothers 23 years ago. Still, the story didn't disappear. It became part of the collective memory, an uneasy reminder that sometimes time and drought combine to reveal the truth. And after all those vanished years, Daniel and Rachel were finally found, their story coming full circle by the shimmering, giving waters of Lake Morgan. Their plates read D and R98. Once their beginning, now their memorial. Inside the car, discovery teams hesitated before opening the doors. The water had drawn away, but the eerie quiet inside that rusted 1969 Pontiac GTO was far from comforting. The first thing they saw, hidden in the murky gloom, were two skeletal remains seated exactly where the bride and groom once had been. Bones lay slumped in what was left of the front seats. The driver's side leaned slightly forward, The passenger side remained upright. Close observation showed the bodies were still harnessed by remnants of seatbelts, suggesting neither had unbuckled as the vehicle slipped beneath the water. Even after more than 2 decades underwater, the positioning was intimate and heartbreaking. The woman's skeleton had its upper right arm draped gently over the man's left arm. It looked almost posed, her hand resting, as if seeking comfort, recognition, or reassurance. The man's skeletal fingers curled into his lap, unmoving, while the woman's hand rested above him, locked in solidarity beyond death. Around them, the environment had taken its toll. The leather seats had collapsed, sagging into the space, spongy with rot. Their color was no longer black, but a weakened, water-stained gray. White lace material, soaked innumerable times, clung to the fabric where parts of the bride's gown had touched it. Bits of ivory embroidery were visible near the top of her seat, clawing at the soft remains of foam insulation. Near the driver's side seat, decayed tuxedo fabric preyed on the seams of the upholstery, faint, but still visible enough to evoke memories of a wedding tux. The forensic team moved in with soft cloths and tweezers. Each piece of fabric was a remnant of what would have been their wedding attire. The suit Daniel proudly wore that night, the dress Rachel cherished, its lace pressed between pages or tossed afterward in eager celebration. Now, it clung to death and water, yet remained undeniably theirs. The highlight of the forensic examination was the glove compartment. It hadn't been soaked beyond possibility. Perhaps it had been sealed or survived the way a sturdy door resists water pressure. The moment it swung open, someone whispered. Inside, pristine despite the grime and rust, was a wedding photo. It hadn't shifted. It was glazed in a protective plastic sleeve. The colors remained vivid. Rachel's radiant smile, white dress flowing, Daniel's broad grin, tuxedo crisp. The trio in the image wavered gently in the beam of a flashlight, and a hush fell. Slowly, one of the investigators reached in and touched the sleeve. The photo slid free. On the back, scrawled in fine, precise cursive, almost mechanically beautiful, were the words, "Forever starts tonight." The handwriting was unmistakable. This wasn't any photo someone had snapped. It was the one she had written on. A message, a vow, a testament. And it was contained in both the happiest and saddest record of that night. Forensic testing began immediately. Bone samples were collected and strapped for analysis. Investigators took care not to damage the seats. DNA samples hung over seat fabric for comparison. They took pictures from multiple angles and swabbed every surface for DNA. The lace and tuxedo fragments were bagged separately, tagged, and preserved. After sample collection, forensic scientists entrusted the material to the state lab. When chromatography and mitochondrial DNA profiling came back, they released the findings. Yes, the 2 skeletal individuals found in the car were indeed Daniel and Rachel Whitmore. Their DNA was matched based on dental records, DNA from parents, and familial patterns. Police confirmed within 48 hours. It was the most definitive confirmation the Whitmore and local families could ever receive. And yet the hardest truth to face. Because after 23 years of wanting them home, they were home. Permanently. The community felt a resonance. Some cried tears of closure. Others paused in disbelief, staring at archived news footage of their wedding night. The lingering sadness gone? Not exactly. But answers were now worded in absolutes, not in hypotheticals. Their disappearance became a closed chapter. Their death, recorded, not left as an open-ended question. In journalism, the moment the lab confirmed the remains, the county press issued the headline. Couple found in Pontiac GTO after 23 years. The photo in the glove compartment became the emblem of it all. The phrase "forever starts tonight." Ever faithful, ever ironic, felt poignant and cruel. It was a vow that bound them in life, and an elegy that bound them in death. During the formal announcement, investigators explained that there was no sign of foul play inside the car. No bullet holes, no indication of forced removal. It was a closed system. Two people who entered that vehicle placed their hands together and stayed together until the water rose around them. The seats hadn't fired back. The trunk was empty. The dashboard had withstood rust. The car had gone down peacefully, drowning in muddy water behind a curve known as Whitmore Bend. Within 6 weeks, anthropologists worked with pathologists to provide the Whitmore families with more closure. Time of death estimates, explanations that their bones felt preserved because of low oxygen underwater, that seals remained in place preventing scavenger intrusion. There was no sign of toxicology because of decomposition, but the inference was that they died from underwater entrapment, not trauma. Alice Whitmore, Rachel's mother, came to the lab personally. She sat in a quiet hallway as technicians handed her the wedding photo with its inscription. She didn't speak. Instead, she stared at the words, "Forever starts tonight," and drew tears that weren't just hers. Her husband gripped her hand. Friends, silent, bowed their heads. Daniel's brother, Michael, gently lifted the skeletal remains in their cloth wrappings. Each bone nodded to a brother long gone, a marriage lost, a story paused for 23 years and finally given a chapter break. Soon after, the funeral home arranged a ceremony. The dresses and tuxedo fragments were laid across the pews. The wedding photo was framed and displayed at the front. And when Pastor Milligan spoke, he said simply, "They entered that night believing in forever. They never left. Let us remember not the sorrow of their disappearance, but the promise of what they believed." All of this stemmed from one photo, prescient and silent in a glove compartment. All of it reaffirmed the possibility that love and forever might shift forms, but they didn't evaporate. The remains, the clothing fabric, the photograph, and the words on its back became their final testament. And in so doing, Daniel and Rachel Whitmore became the legendary lovers of Lake Morgan. Two human souls forever fused in those few precious words. Forever starts tonight, etched in time, water, and memory. Investigators returned to the shoreline, standing where the newly exposed lakebed met the dusty remains of the old road. Beneath their feet and sifting through the dry layers of silt, they discovered the long-hidden evidence that had been invisible for years. Indicators of a sudden, unintended departure from the pavement. Telltale signs of weight sliding over the dirt shoulder were etched into the embankment, visible now that the water had receded. Even under the midday sun, faint, half-buried skid marks traced the family's car's final trajectory, like a fading memory traced across the sand. Following the path of those tracks, experts found that the couple's 1969 Pontiac GTO, its cherry-red paint long distorted by time under the lake, must have drifted imperceptibly off the uneven shoulder. The vehicle had taken a sharp turn, too sharp to have been intentional. Someone at the helm, likely Daniel, might have swerved to miss a startled deer leaping from the forest's edge. Or perhaps a sudden fatigue after the long wedding celebration had overwhelmed him, leading to a catastrophic hesitation. Alternatively, poor lighting, common on that poorly maintained road in 1996, might have fooled his vision as the moon dipped behind thick treetops. In that era, the road was a narrow ribbon of asphalt patched sporadically, cracked and giving way along the edge. No guardrails protected it from the sheer drop-off into the lake, the result of budget constraints and local politics favoring a paved, but not safeguarded route. Those trees lining the edge were once careful guardians of scenic privacy, but in the dark, beneath their canopy, they also cloaked danger. A single misjudgment, the wrong moment of overcorrected steering, and the car would have sailed off the cliff, heading straight into the heart of the murkiest waters below. It was a steep descent. The shoreline dropped almost vertically into the lake, where the depths quickly swallowed the daylight. No gradual slope softened the fall. Instead, The car would have plunged into darkness almost instantly. With water filling its cabin, pressure building, panic setting in, Daniel and Rachel would have been reduced to mere passengers of fate. The police theorized that they likely died instantly. Cracked skulls impact through the windshield, or perhaps remained conscious but unable to free themselves within moments. Their seatbelts, designed to hold them in place during a crash, instead sealed their end. Bound by safety meant to protect them, they were instead trapped as the car sank in silence. The current in that section of Lake Morgan was anything but gentle. Over the years, silt and sediment bellied around the submerged vehicle, softening its angle until it blended like a secret in mud. Its exact location had eluded first responders at the time. Sonar returned nothing in the murky depth, and visibility was next to zero in the dark, oxygen-starved water. With no reflective paint or metallic grin to pierce the sonar, the car hid behind an opaque veil, protected by depth and debris. Even when dive teams searched back in 1996, they were limited to sight and trained instinct. The water that night had washed away any evidence of the forced descent. No floating debris, no gas leaks, no sign of bodies. The car, at that time, was merely a rumor. No diver had come across a vehicle silhouette, and the search grid, carefully plotted against the known shoreline, never intersected that silent abyss. It took the perfect storm of drought, low water, and a shift of 10 years to expose the lakebed and reveal those haunted tracks. The investigation team recognized the alignment of those tire marks with the visible skid. They confirmed the speed, angle, and possible conditions of the crash. The officials reconstructed the scene with digital pacing and timeline simulations. A deer startled the driver, a swerve, a shrug to regain control that failed, a metal drop into darkness, and a sealing of fate as the glass sealed and silt closed in. Inside their living room, the Whitmore family streamed video clips of the reconstruction. The digital layering of skid maps with echo scans painted the final minutes of Daniel and Rachel's lives. As they watched the arc of the car being mapped onto the newly exposed dirt embankment, they saw how one wrong curve could undo decades of hope. Rachel's mother traced her finger along the faint tracks, whispering, "You drove right here." Michael, Daniel's younger brother, knelt by the broken guardrail stones, whispering forgiveness for a journey's tragic end. In the wake of the discovery, the county acted fast to prevent any future tragedies. Guardrails were erected along the lake road. Warning signs, steep drop next 500 feet, were posted. Reflective markers spun in the light at curves, and the road was renamed Whitmore Bend, to remind every traveler what it meant to lose sight of caution. Local politics argued about funding and infrastructure, but the Whitmore tragedy became an unwilling catalyst for upgrade and community resolve. On the anniversary of the crash's confirmation, a small plaque was placed at the roadside, in memory of Daniel and Rachel Whitmore, lost in the darkness. May this curve serve as their marker of love and warning to all. School kids now study the story as a cautionary tale in driver safety, and tourists pause to photograph the view that hides yet once revealed the couple's secret end. Boaters say they feel strangely protective of the bend, noticing how the lake depths abruptly rise where the car vanished. Most hauntingly, the community realized how quickly fate could ride the crooked lines of a road. A misplaced deer, a dark night, a corner without guardrails. Movements so mundane, so tied to life's order, could re-script destinies in a blink. And for Daniel and Rachel, the crash wasn't the end of their love story. It was a pause. 23 years later, it was proof that water cannot forever bury love, and that truth, like a dusty roadbed, sometimes emerges in cracked clarity. As the sun sets over Lake Morgan now, it dips past Whitmore Bend, tracing stories over water. Every driver turns with care, every lane vulnerable, every heartbeat mindful, and every passing traveler holds a candle for the couple who vanished on a wedding night and were, at last, finally seen. When the news broke, a hush fell over Glenview County that afternoon. An eerie stillness, as if the earth itself was taking a moment to breathe. Though decades had passed since the disappearance of Daniel and Rachel Whitmore, the story of the young couple had remained etched into the town's collective memory. Now, with confirmation of their car's recovery and the couple's remains, grief transformed into a solemn recognition. This was not simply the loss of two people. It was the return of their story, unfinished but no longer lost. That evening, a gathering formed at the edge of the lake where the Pontiac had been lifted from the water. Lanterns were lit, their flickering light casting soft reflections on the glass-still surface. A diverse crowd assembled. Longtime neighbors, local officials, reporters, and the families who had endured 23 years of hope, heartbreak, and unanswered questions. Among them stood Rachel's mother, Alice Whitmore, now in her early 70s, her silver hair tied neatly behind her neck with a black ribbon. She moved slowly, leaning on the arm of her son, while gripping a worn wooden box containing her daughter's wedding bouquet. The bouquet had remained untouched for over 20 years, preserved under a glass cover in Alice's dining room. The petals, white roses, baby's breath, and delicate greenery, had faded slightly, but in that moment they looked freshly arranged, as though waiting for Rachel to return. When Alice approached the recovered vehicle, a shallow excavation site cordoned off with yellow tape, a low murmur of respect passed among the crowd. She knelt at the edge of the car, opened the display box, and placed the bouquet near the driver's side door where Daniel's skeletal frame lay. Many in attendance had tears glistening under the lanterns. The air was damp, silent, as though the universe echoed their emotion. The next day, local news channels aired footage of the memorial. In one segment, they captured Daniel's younger brother, Michael, standing before reporters near the reclaimed car. His gaze was unwavering, though his voice quivered with relief. For 23 years, he had driven the same stretch of road, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain the mystery. And finally, tonight, he found the truth. They weren't taken. They weren't murdered. They were just lost, and now they're home, he said softly, his words carrying both finality and grace. Many viewers were moved by his statement. It was an admission of acceptance, but also a release, as if saying goodbye with respect instead of resignation. Local journalists described his words as one of the most hauntingly poetic closings to a long unsolved mystery. Editorials in the Glenview Gazette spoke of how the town's identity had been shaped by this story. The vanished wedding couple, the missing red GTO, the empty photos in the Whitmore home. The discovery was called the final missing piece. Not just of a cold case file, but of a shared emotional journey. The phrase took on new weight. Life, love, loss, and ending, but also remembrance and closure. Within a month, the county approved the installation of a small plaque at the roadside curve where Daniel and Rachel had taken their final drive. The text was carved with silent dignity. Forever starts tonight. Daniel and Rachel, 1996. The plaque's placement was deliberate. Mounted on a low stone base at the bend of the now-repaired and fortified road, it looked both forward and backward. Travelers slowed as they drove by. Some pulled over, stepping out to take photos, leaving flowers, or simply standing in quiet reflection. In the morning light, the plaque caught the sun, and the words seemed to glow with promise. Schools now made annual field trips to the site, less for mystery-seeking, and more for lessons about fate, responsibility, and the fragility of life's paths. Students were taught about safe driving, the importance of guardrails and responsible infrastructure, and the acknowledgement that sometimes, despite every precaution, human lives are subject to turns that carry them out of sight. For years afterward, the Whitmore family returned to the site every anniversary. They placed white roses on the plaque, each petal a witness to what might have been a lifetime. Alice brought the glass-encased bouquet until its petals were too fragile. Then she brought prints of the same flower arrangement. Michael carried faded license plate fragments in his pocket. Mementos of a journey that ended but was now remembered with honor. In time, the story became part of Glenview legend. They called it the Lake Mystery, the Lost Honeymoon, or simply Whitmore Bend. Tourists would ask about the curved lane, the story of the couple who disappeared on their wedding night. Local artisans painted the GTO's outline, installed model red cars in shops, and created candle designs molded after the wedding bouquet. Yet none of it overshadowed the humanity that underpinned the tragedy. At the core of it all was two young souls whose choice to take a drive under starlight was neither bold nor reckless. It was just life. And life, as the memorial taught them, can end quietly in accidents born of chance, fade in the depths of history, and emerge years later with a story to tell. As the community repaired the road, guardrails, reflectors, and warning signs, they also repaired a collective wound. The memorial plaque offered a kind of poetic justice, a marker that guided real-world behavior while honoring a deeper truth about human connection. People learned that to remember is not to relive sorrow, but to recognize that love deserves dignity, even in death. And sometimes, closure arrives not by unraveling dark motives or uncovering conspiracies, but simply through nature's slow unveiling of buried places and forgotten peace. Today, on quiet summer nights, when the moon casts cool silver light across the bend, a soft breeze passes, bending the tall grass near the plaque. One can imagine two lost souls greeting each other beyond the trees, a distant hum of a GTO engine, a wedding dance that time never entirely consumed. In Glenview, memory became a sacred place alongside the lake's edge. And though Rachel and Daniel's story ended tragically, it also began again, in the hearts of those who never stopped believing. For the Bruce County visitor who reads the plaque, it's more than a name etched in stone. It's an invitation to remember the ones who drive through nights with hearts full of possibility, and who vanish not because of dark force, but because their final drive was simply taken. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most haunting truths are not unsolved mysteries, but the silent acceptance that life can shift in an instant, and that when darkness returns to light, we must honor it with love, memorial, and the courage to say, "They came home at last." And so the small plaque stands, close to the road, near the lake's edge, bearing a vow made at the wedding, and echoing through the years. Forever starts tonight. Daniel and Rachel, 1996.